In my last update, I showed you the weekly charts. Again, weekly signals turning back to bullish the previous week. Building upon that, but again, they have officially flipped back to bullish. Momentum had flipped back after our 52,000 low there shortly thereafter. That with oscillators turning back up, all the bullish signals in the daily time frame. Now we have the weekly signals bullish. Can they remain that way? And as they flip back to bullish, now approaching this next level of resistance from these two peaks over here, which I'll be addressing in this video. Negative diversions here at the March peak. Will we get another set of negative divergences with momentum indicators here and the RSI in the weekly time frame? Things to be paying attention to as we approach that trend line. Bulls are in control. Signals in the weekly time frame are bullish. Now have to remain that way. Watching what happens at this resistance that we are now approaching as we're moving closer towards 100,000 on Bitcoin. Quickly, signals are back to bullish in the weekly time frame. If they can remain that way, we can go a whole lot higher. Talking about the resistance in the weekly time frame in this video, we are just underneath. Signals are back to bullish, momentum oscillator back to bullish. If it can remain that way, the bulls can remain in power. Bears were in control. They lost control last week. The bulls are now in control. The daily signals have been bullish after we turned off of that 52,000 level. They've been consistently bullish, except for a few minor pullbacks, which I've talked about. We've seen momentum signals turn bullish. We just saw this previous week with Sunday's close. We saw the trend signals turn back to bullish. The weekly time frame momentum's already been bullish after we had that 52,000 low. Our signals turned back to bullish in the daily time frame, have been consistently bullish except for a few minor pullbacks. Shortly thereafter, momentum turned back to bullish here in the weekly time frame, leading to the breakout that has now turned the trending signal back to bullish. Remain that way. The bulls are in control. We can go a whole lot higher. We're approaching resistance. We'll be talking about the resistance directly overhead in this video. Bulls need to clear it or pull back and clear it. The bears need a reversal off of it and to set up a divergence on the RSI. I'll be talking about both the bullish and bearish cases in this video. The bulls are in control, taking control as of last week from the bears. Got to stay above this 69,000 area, this dotted red line, which is the peak over here from 2021. To be able to clear the resistance levels I'll be talking about in this video, start directly overhead, which we're likely going to reach. If we look at the weekly chart, again, we've had a clear breakout above this level. We had pushed above it on an intra-week basis here. The election pulled back. Got a back test of the trend line in the daily time frame, push back below the trend line here in the weekly time frame, back below 69,000. And then we surged with the election. Important trend lines I'm now watching are the highs from over here. We're just underneath that level here. Bitcoin could stall here, pull back, and then continue the advance above this black trend line right here. If it pulls back or if it backtests in the weekly time frame and then goes higher, or backtest horizontal support here at 73,757 and we pull back like that and then we go above this level, that would be again long-term bullish as long as the weekly signals can remain bullish. This could also be an area for a reversal if we stall at it and charts I'm about to show you begin to form something similar to what we had over here. Now, again, I talked about coming up here. We had peaked over here. We went $4,100 above this prior high. I talked about that. If we got above this level, which I told you before we did that we were going to, and that could take Bitcoin to the 77,857 area, which would be $4,100 above this level. There's 78,000. I told you we could move 4,000 or 5,000 above this level if the double top was in play. We surged beyond that. Still the possibility of a divergence on the RSI in the weekly time frame, similar to what we have over here, but this is clearly a double top. Here we have had a big surge above this level, and the bulls have regained control in the weekly time frame. So now two important trend lines I'm watching. This trend line right here, we're directly below it. We still may reach this level or this trend line right here from this low right here, excluding some of the shadows here, and coming up and to this peak right here. So connecting this peak right here, connecting this low right here, again, coming in very close to that area. So two important trend lines of resistance I'm watching that we could stall near either a pullback to continue the advance with the bullish longer term scenario, or to complete a divergence here, if we stall here, on the RSI in the weekly time frame. Additionally, this week we are getting an 8 of a 9 count, so that's something to pay attention to, that we're getting a 9 count showing price exhaustion. Remember, I talked about the bounce off of the 50-week moving average over here at 52,000, back over here at 49,000. Longer term, if we hold above these levels, hold above the 20-week moving average, again, the bulls are in control. But we've rallied up now, moving towards this next level of resistance, clearing this resistance. The bulls won, flipping the weekly signals back to bullish, but now they've taken us, or they're taking us towards this next level of resistance in the weekly time frame. Now, we can stall at this resistance level if we form a divergence on the RSI in the daily time frame. We reach an extreme. I'll show you the chart in just a little bit. But if we stall at this area, we could see the 8 bar or the 9 bar stall the account, the advance near the trend lines I'm showing you. This is the weekly chart. Currently, we're on bar 8 of 9. Possible bar 8 or 9 could be a peak and get a pullback. You go a little bit higher, and then you get a pullback or reversal. Today, Bitcoin is getting a 13 count in the daily time frame with a 7 of a 9. The 13 count, again, price exhaustion is what could happen is we could see a double sequence count reversal signal happen, pull back, form a divergence on the RSI, turn back up and go towards the trend lines I'm talking about, and complete this 9 count in the daily time frame. You'll have a double sequence count reversal signal, which would be a 13 followed by a 9. And again, maybe you go a little higher, maybe the 9 count marks a turn, but a 13 and a 9 count now setting up. Today is bar 7 of 9. You have to remain above the bars from 4 bars ago, but we are completing a 13, and we could complete a 9 by Thursday. It's a Tuesday bar. It would be bar 8. Thursday would be bar 9. So, and we could complete bar 9, still go a little bit higher, but again, something to pay attention to as we approach these trend lines in the weekly time frame. Now, I want to show you something important about the trend line right here. And again, we're just underneath it, this trend line from the highs back in 2021. Okay. Possible they're pointing to the next high, whether a pullback and then continue the advance in a larger bull market, or whether a topping process to form a divergence on the RSI. I'll show you what has to happen for Bitcoin to continue the advance, continue a bull run much higher levels. Keeping this trend line in your mind right here from these highs, just underneath it, keep that in your mind as I show you this chart. Now, this is Tether. I've talked about this chart quite a bit, and I told you back over here in this sell-off phase that if we were going to get a longer-term bull market, we've got to be able to break this trend line right here on Tether. And we have to see it collapse. Eventually, Bitcoin, I talked about this trend line right here, Bitcoin would need to clear that trend line. This is a trend line I just showed you on the other chart in the weekly time frame. Now, Bitcoin is likely going to form a divergence on the RSI to reach this trend line. But Tether is already reaching this trend line. It may flirt some more with it, dance around it a little bit. This is an important trend line. Why? Because it's marked all the Bitcoin tops. So that's why I say it has to collapse. And it's what happened is Bitcoin got above this trend line right here. Okay, it got above the trend line there. And Tether broke this trend line right here and has moved back to this longer term trend line where all the Bitcoin tops since 2017 have been marked by this trend line. So this is why I say we have to be able to clear the blue trend line on Bitcoin, and Tether has to collapse if the bull phase is going to continue. if we're going to have a much bigger bull market, if this is not forming a top right here and now at this trend line right here, and it could, if we get a divergence completing on the RSI, which is carving out right now. So again, I'm showing you what has to happen for the bullish case. The bullish case, we got to collapse with Tether. Bitcoin's got to eventually get above this or pull back, hit this, pull back, and then get above it. Okay, that's what has to happen for the bullish case. This trend line has to collapse. The bearish case is that we see a divergence develop in the weekly time frame on the RSI, moving above the March peak. Bitcoin stalls near these trend lines I've been talking about, near this trend line right here, and it forms a divergence. Tether marks another Bitcoin top at this trend line and begins to surge back up. So again, the bullish and the bearish case. The bulls need this trend line to break. The bears need a bounce off of it and a reversal off of this trend line right here and have the whole thing fail. So again, bulls have clearly won, just as the bears won at the March peak and we went nowhere and had the 33% drop and the chop and slop for the last 8 months. And then now we get this breakout. The bulls are now back in control. The bulls have won, taking us to this next level of resistance. Now they have to be able to clear it in order for the advance to continue. Otherwise, the risk is that we can form still a top around that area. So again, we could just get a pullback and then resume the advance. But the weekly signals, if they end up turning back to bearish, that would be problematic for longer term bullish case. The problem is recession is still coming. Now I told you Bitcoin may get a rally on into the first quarter, go well above 100,000, getting the bull run ahead of the recession. I've talked about that bullish scenario. Or again, this bullish scenario I've talked about where we get a breakout, but then we stall at this area, which would be a short-term bullish move, stall near these trend lines here in the weekly time frame. Now again, Tether trying to find support right here, trying to bounce off this level right now as Bitcoin starting to sell off. Tether's reaching this area, and again, it might dance around this area as Bitcoin makes its way to this level. Bitcoin's likely going to form a divergence on the RSI daily time frame and reach this trend line. We're just directly underneath it. So again, an important trend line of resistance, but wanted to continue to show you this chart because again, it's marked all the Bitcoin tops back over here in 2017. This trend line, the tagging of this trend line has marked the Bitcoin tops. So in 2019, we got a peak. This was actually a 71% drop. A little hard to see on this chart because I don't have a log scaling on it because I'm just trying to show you the comparison here. But this peak here in 2019, we dropped, we rebounded back up, we got a lower high, and then we dropped, and we ended up dropping 71%. Here we tagged it. Here we came just to it, marking before the pandemic sell-off here in the first 2021 top. Again, we danced around this area, marking this top with the diversions on the indicators with Bitcoin, and then the 2021 second peak, again, that trend line marking the top, and then more recently, the March peak right here, tagging that trend line once again. We got above this resistance level with Tether, came up here, and we saw the 33% decline. We broke the trend line here. We broke the trend line right here with Tether, got back below horizontal resistance turn support, and now we come back to this trend line yet again. Bitcoin is just under this trend line right here. Well, we've had a powerful rally. And again, clearly, the bulls are back in control in the weekly time frame. We've come up to this next level of resistance. As Tether breaks down, that could stall the advance. So that's what I'm trying to say. But let me be clear. The bulls are back in control in the weekly time frame. My signals remain bullish. Going to see a divergence develop in the daily time frame on the RSI, and we'll be watching what happens. Do we get here another Bitcoin top, another peak as these other peaks, or do we break this level and the bulls take control, or do we pull back, tag the level, pull back, clear this level, and again Tether breaks down? So what I'm trying to tell you is there's a risk, major top here, if the RSI ends up forming a divergence like it did back at the 2021 peak on the RSI, which I'll show you in a moment, or again, a pullback with the bullish scenario where we pull back, but then the advance resumes at a later date and Tether eventually breaks down Bitcoin eventually clears this level of resistance. So I just wanted to show you these important trend lines with Tether on Bitcoin. That's why I'm showing you these trend lines here in the weekly time frame. Tether is at that level of support, could stall the Bitcoin advance right here. Doesn't mean the advance ends. The bulls are in control. As long as they're in control, we can go higher. It does mean risk of a pullback or a possible reversal, one or the other. Here's the weekly chart of Bitcoin. Now, at that March peak, we had a divergence right here. We had the high as a topping tail, but then again, the RSI is looking at the close here in the weekly time frame. But we did go higher on a closing basis, even though we got a lower high there. So we still got a divergence right there, very similar to the divergence that formed at the peak over here. I pointed out that over here, we peaked in April. Over here, we peaked in March. Here, we had a top in November. Here, everybody was saying, oh, we're going to be at 100,000, 300,000, 500,000, 700,000. November, we ended up reversing. Now, here we've gone much higher than this peak. I talked about the 73,700 area. If we were to have done something similar, it would have been, like I said, 77, 78,000. Here we've gone to 90,000, so we're just under that 100,000 area. But this is an important trend line to be watching here, that 100,000 area. For Bitcoin to go higher, it's got to clear this trend line, and Tether has to break the long-term trend line that had been marking the tops for Bitcoin. Here we have the possibility of something very similar to over here if we stall at this trend line. And again, let me be clear, my signals remain bullish in the weekly time frame. As long as they remain bullish, go higher. What would be bearish is dropping back below the 20-week moving average, not being able to get back above it, and having top develop, as Tether is suggesting possibly a top is developing here. Suggests not a top is Tether breaking that trend line as I talked about. Just pay attention to the RSI. It's looking very similar to over here as we're approaching this trend line. And again, these highs could be pointing to the next high, which is we're directly underneath it. Now, we'll probably reach it because the RSI in the daily time frame will probably form a bearish divergence. Keeping in mind, if it does do that, near this trend line, you can form this larger divergence here that can either give you a correction or a possible reversal, something to be aware of. For Bitcoin to remain bullish, as long as it remains above the 20-week moving average, then again, the bulls are in power as long as the RSI holds above 50. Again, we've had that clear breakout. So again, that is bullish as long as we don't drop back below 69,000 in that trend line. But this does look very similar to what's going on over here to what we had over here. So again, it was RSI dropping back below 50, the Bitcoin price dropping back below the 20-week moving average that validated that negative diversion. So again, that's what would have to happen if we were to stall at the trend line from these two peaks over here that I talked about. Keeping in mind we're just underneath that trend line in the weekly time frame, the RSI reached extremes and we're seeing it turn back down. It's likely going to do something like what it did over here, where it turns back down and then you turn back up and see a divergence. And if that happens, we'll likely slam right into that trend line of resistance in the weekly time frame. Again, this trend line right here from these highs. We're just below it. If we sell off a little bit, again, we could still come back up and hit this level, forming a divergence on the RSI in the daily time frame. I have here Bitcoin's volatility oscillator. And again, Bitcoin volatility is to spike. It's got to be able to get above the signal line and remain above it, like what we had over here. And we had attempts to get back above it, and each one failed. We had the September bottom for Bitcoin, and volatility peaked above the signal line, and volatility has been dropping ever since. And that's given us the rally off of 49,000 and 52,000 areas, those last two significant lows that have been made on Bitcoin. Again, Bitcoin's rising, volatility is dropping. In 2021, volatility was dropping as Bitcoin formed its first peak. Then a violent reversal on Bitcoin, and we saw volatility spike, and Bitcoin ended up dropping 55%. Then Bitcoin rebounded to a new high just above the previous peak in April, and we saw volatility drop, and it diverged with Bitcoin. Bitcoin made a higher high, volatility made a lower low, it diverged. This looks very similar to that as we approach the trend line of resistance in the weekly time frame that I've been talking about. That's the risk. If Tether bounces off that trend line, if volatility here forms a divergence again with Bitcoin, ends up getting back above the signal line over here, it formed a divergence with Bitcoin, got back above the signal line, and it validated a Bitcoin peak. That is the risk. So is what I'm trying to tell you is the bulls need to keep us below the signal line, keep volatility dropping. Errors, if we turn off the trend line of resistance, which again we're likely going to reach it, we're probably going to form a divergence and go higher, stall around that trend line. If we do, then the risk is that we either get a top for a pullback in a larger bull phase, in a larger bull market, we start a reversal and get something like what we had over here. So things I'm paying attention to, this does look very similar, might just give us only a pullback with Bitcoin if we try to rally into the first quarter ahead of a recession. So just some things. Remember, the bulls are still in control now. They've retaken control last week in the weekly time frame. They've been in control in the daily time frame since when we began to see our signals turn back to bullish at 52,000, consistently power and got us above our 100 period moving average and our 20-week moving average. Those are the moving averages that show longer term who is in control. Already been bullish, but now we've seen that confirmed with weekly signals, as I talked about my last update, turning back to bullish. As we approach that trend line in the weekly time frame, this is something I'm going to be paying very close attention to. Or do the bulls remain in power and we just remain below the signal line? The bears, to get us back above the signal line, then that would be very, very problematic. We reverse off the trend line I've been talking about for Bitcoin here in the weekly time frame. So again, we're likely going to see that diversion set up on the RSI in the daily time frame and probably come tag this trend line here. Again, we're directly underneath it. We'll see what happens. Do we stall there and pull back? Do we start setting up a reversal and form that divergence on the RSI, that I showed you in this video? Another thing I'm watching right here now, here in the upper window, I have Bitcoin, and right here, this curve has marked tops and bottoms. Now, again, sometimes we tag it, other times we don't. 2019 peak, and then right again, the 2020 peak right here, we didn't quite reach it. It marked the 2017 top, it did mark the 2021 tops, and it did mark the 2024 peak back in March. So again, just watching as we're approaching this level again, clear this level or pull back and clear this level again, then we may be around here for a while like we were over here with the first 2021 peak coming down to that level. It allowed the advance to continue. But you got to be able to clear that trend line. But if a top develops, again, it could be just above this area or right at this area at this curve right here. So just something I'm paying attention to. Now, we are in the Tuesday session for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is currently down just over 2.5% at the moment, being just over halfway through the Tuesday session. Trump rally continued. Bitcoin continued to rally on Monday. It was up 10.38% on Sunday. It rose by just under 5%, 4.83%. Big surge. Upon the big surge from last week, the election results, and again, I talked about when we were pulling back here, I talked about moving above this high towards the 77,000 area, just under 78,000. Double topper to form. I told you that if we continued, saw strength and closed strong for the week, bulls can flip the weekly chart back to bullish. We saw the bulls do that. Talked about a rally here, again, that I thought would at least go 4 or 5,000 above this level. I talked about that at great length of detail. And if we got a strong move, the bulls will regain control in the weekly time frame. They've now done that. The bulls are in control in the weekly time frame. Bitcoin continues to get the parabolic move. Over here, I talked about, way back over here, I talked about getting above the 100 period moving average, and then we bounced off of it. Talked about this bull flag that formed. Again, the bullish diversions. Told you we'd rally up to 68, 69,000. Told you we'd pull back right there. Likely go to 70, 71,000. We cleared 71,000 by 1,500, went up to this high. So I told you because we went up to that high, we were likely going to go to a new high, new all-time high. Bulls clearing this level, forming a breakout of this trend line and a bull flag. Our scenario was a possible double top. Cleared this resistance. The bulls are back in power, but we're now approaching another level of resistance to be watching. And I'm a big believer in the 100 period moving average. We had some chop. The 100 period is this pink line. We took it out and we were choppy around it, and it failed, and then it rose up to it, it failed, and then we got above it right here. See this pink line? We got above it, and then we back tested it. I talked about this back at the time. As long as we hold above that 100 period moving average, longer term bullish, and the 20-week in the weekly time frame, 10-month moving average in the monthly time frame. These are key support levels. You hold above them, good things are happening. So again, this is what we saw back over here, and then we were able to clear resistance. We watched as the bulls and bears fought it out. The bulls clearly won. Now we're getting extended, so we'll be watching. If we do pull back, we'll be watching this horizontal level of support, 73,700 or so. If the bulls are to remain in control, the weekly time frame has to remain bullish. We got to be able to hold above this trend line right here that we broke out of, this trend line right here, and we have to be able to hold above 69,000, which is the peak from the 2021 peak. If we hold above those levels, bullish. If we end up dropping back below the March high, you could still test these levels and get a back test of the breakout in the weekly time frame. We had it right here. The daily time frame dropped back below it, but that created a topping tail on the weekly chart.